Good afternoon, dear students. So we're looking at Foundations of Law, HOX 6061, and well, I've been giving a lot of video lectures. So today will be the last video lecture from my side because we have more or less covered everything. Just a few points to remember. Homework 2 is already up, so I hope you have planned it carefully and will be uploading it on time. Today we look at criminal law, so just some areas here and there. Of course, I understand that this will be a specialized topic, a specialized course which you will be learning, maybe in the second year or third year. So we'll just look at the very bare basic elements today. And once this is done, then that's it. There is something else, business law. It's not for the exam, but it's there in the notes and you can read it if you are interested. Just some very basic ideas. So, criminal law, and it's a very fascinating area of law. As a lawyer, as a young lawyer, I did practice criminal law at one point. Not as a mainstay, but most of my work was related with intellectual property law, trademarks, patents, copyrights, those sort of things. But there's always a criminal law element that, as a lawyer, one gets exposed to, and it can be very interesting and fascinating because the criminal mind, the way people work and crazy ideas that people come up with, and then the way the police try to investigate and of course make a mess of everything sometimes, and then the matter goes to court, and that's where the fun starts as a lawyer, because you can see how sometimes a good lawyer can demolish the case of the prosecution, and how sometimes a determined prosecutor or government lawyer can really help to bring the matter to a closure and to see that justice is served. So it's very interesting and fascinating. Of course, as lawyers, remember, I've already spoken about this in the past. Your job is not to judge anybody. You are the lawyer. Your job is to defend the client's rights. And then, of course, in this situation, you should make sure that you don't get too involved into something, because otherwise you can get in trouble as well. So you have to maintain your objectivity and detachment. And it's a client, it's a case, you give it your best efforts. And of course, don't lie or anything. Just do your work, and if you are defending your client, and let's say your client has done some really bad things, then of course you can't really maybe hope to get your client completely free, but you can try to get the sentence reduced. So you can try some of these things, and whatever you can do to help your client. Of course, within the framework of the law, you should not break the law yourself. All right, and lawyers are an important part of the criminal justice system. So you're not paid money to lie or to subvert facts or to hide evidence or destroy files or do something like that. No, I mean, your job is, as a professional, to try to use your knowledge to help society, help your client, and help the wheels of justice. So, criminal law is a very fascinating area because, first of all, you have the entire weight of the state that's behind the public prosecutor, or the criminal law from the criminal law experts from the government side. And of course, criminal law is designed to make sure that society stays safe, and its constituents and the people who live in society are protected from antisocial behavior. But at the same time, well, a police officer can interfere with an individual's freedom in the most amazing ways. And a police officer can also, if required in the course of duty, shoot you or hurt you to subdue you. Again, has to use reasonable force. But all of these are important elements to keep in mind. So many of us live in societies where we don't realize what a corrupt police officer can do, or what a corrupt criminal justice system can destroy. So there are a lot of checks and balances within the system, and they are very important because criminal law gives a lot of power to the state, and it's very important that this power should not be misused. So these safeguards really help. And of course, there are certain sayings, I think you may have also heard about them. For example, it's better that 100 guilty people are spared, but even one innocent person being punished is unacceptable. So you see the logic over here is that your individual freedoms are very precious, and so you can't just lock people up and infringe upon their personal liberties. And very often we see a lot of these issues arising. For example, you may have read in the news or heard in the news about terrorist attacks that happen sometimes in France or in Austria, and then it turns out that yes, this person was on a suspect list. You see, the suspect list doesn't mean anything. It's just that, well, somebody has been under surveillance. So for example, in France, they say there are 50,000 young men or women who are in the suspect list. But you can't just catch all 50,000 of them and put them on a ship and sink it or somewhere, or send them to Libya or something. That's not possible. So of course there are all these issues. On the one hand, you could say, well, that's the problem with democracies. They're very soft, but you don't really want to be on the wrong side of criminal law, because you can get in serious trouble if the laws are not properly drafted. And we often see this in cases like anti-terrorism laws or things like that. So theory of crime, of course, deals with certain issues. What sort of acts should be punished and to what extent? Now, this is a very important criteria, because if you look at any book on criminal procedure code or the penal code or the criminal code of the country, then you will see that there are clear-cut definitions. And if you don't fall within that definition, then it's not a crime. So if something is not listed as a criminal act, then it's not a crime. So you have to be very specific about what sort of act could be considered as a criminal act. There are very strict definitions for these sort of things, and of course, if you don't fall within that category, then you don't really get affected. So for example, of course, let's look at it this way. There is a lot of debate about hate speech. Yes, and a lot of countries have outlawed it. In other countries, it's not just enough to have hate speech, but it should be accompanied with a threat of physical action. And sometimes even that's not enough. You need to have a threat of physical action which causes, well, you could say, an expectation of being harmed, a reasonable, realistic expectation of being harmed. So you see, all these elements are important to be able to prove that this is an offense within that definition. Again, different countries have different laws. So for example, let's say if I rob you, so that would be theft, for example. Because I just picked your pocket. But if 5 people get together and rob you, then already it's a bit more serious here, because 5 people against 1 is an offense by itself. Then if I try to rob you with my gang of friends on a highway, for example, now again there would be a different definition for these sort of things. In the 50s and 60s, there were these, more in the 60s, there was the spate of aircraft hijackings, and because of that, the laws were changed, new laws were introduced, and now, creating any offense on board an aeroplane is punishable to a much greater degree than other situations. So for example, let's say I try to hijack trolley bus number 3 from the university to Coba Maya, that's not in the same category as me trying to hijack a Finnair flight or something. So again, you can see over here the definitions are very important, and the criteria about what is a particular act, which is a criminal act, which is liable to be punished, This is a very strict definition and very elaborate definitions. So you have a lot of these criteria that are laid out. So again, as I may have said in the past, for example, a police officer shoots somebody, as you read often in the news from the United States. It's not straightforward in that sense, wherein you would say, oh yes, the police officer needs to be severely punished, because there could be different factors over here. Maybe this person who attacked the police officer came with a knife. Now, what do you expect the police officer to do? Well, some would say don't shoot, shoot in the air or shoot in the leg. Yeah, well, it's not always straightforward and simple. Sometimes people say you should use a taser or one of those stun guns, but they don't really work if a person is wearing heavy clothing or woolen winter clothing or something like that. So again, why am I saying this? Because, well, if somebody acts in self-defense, then it's not as serious as cold-blooded murder. And if a police officer is working in the course of her duty, then the law assumes that the police officer is doing the right thing. So again, you see there are a lot of these checks and balances, and you have to be very careful about these things. So most criminal law in modern terms is codified, and so in statutes, so it's a peculiarity. And there's always this part about intention is very important, because civil wrongs could be accidental, but a criminal wrong has to be intended, or intention should be shown. So for example, I'm driving my car and I'm going at 30 kilometers per hour, and some stupid kid jumps in front of the car. Yeah, it's not my fault, because I am driving as carefully as possible, and so of course I have no intention of killing somebody. Somebody just comes and stands in front of my car, and I'm not able to react very fast, and I'm not drunk, or I'm not under the influence of narcotics or drugs or something. Then in that case, it's clear that there is no intention, and if there's no intention, then how can I be punished for a criminal act? Also, some other characteristics which are taken into account are the fact that the harm done by the criminal, the harm is both public and private. So the plaintiff is the state, not a private individual, and the plaintiff has a higher standard of proof, because the plaintiff, being the state, has all the powers behind it. And so of course the plaintiff needs to be able to prove beyond reasonable doubt that somebody is guilty of a criminal offense. And lastly, of course, if you are judged to be guilty, then you have to be punished for that. And so these are the certain points which differentiate criminal law from civil law, which we looked at last time. So why do you have criminal law? It could be to increase social welfare. Yeah, so somebody does a bad thing, you criminalize it, and hopefully by doing so you increase the good of society. So one way of looking at this would be drugs. Well, drugs cause a lot of problems, and so of course it's a socially unacceptable activity, and so most countries have outlawed usage of drugs. And now, for the last several years, there have been some debates about the fact whether is the usage of drugs so bad. Now, you see, this can be a bit tricky. Well, of course, cigarettes and tobacco cause cancer, and they're very bad for society. Same goes with alcohol, for example, but at the same time, they are not seen in the same light as maybe cocaine or any of the new stuff that I'm sure you younger people know more about than I do. So of course the question here is social welfare, and deciding what is good for society and what is good for individual freedoms. And sometimes some states have, some countries have legalized cannabis, for example. So again, this debate about social welfare is never ending. It keeps on going on and on. On the other hand, you have the moral theory, which says that people who do something wrong, who are guilty, they need to be punished, because if you don't punish people who are guilty, then there's a serious issue, because then there is no state sanction, people have no fear, and people will do whatever they want to do. Now, this has been toned down a lot. So, for example, people do crazy things and they get away very lightly with them. So, of course, some countries have more strict rules, others have less strict rules. In the case of Estonia, if you may have read the news today, well, there was this serial bomber, who was planting bombs in Tallinn. Even a few people died, and he served his 15 years in prison and came out yesterday. And if you're looking at Finnish news, about those two brothers, Finnish Swedish, crazy stuff. They called the cops over and then they attacked the cops and shot at the cops, and so they were sentenced to 15 years in prison. And then of course there are people who commit murders, and so they are sent to prison. And then in other countries it's not so straightforward. So for example, in Singapore they had this law that if you deface a public monument, or if you commit a nuisance on the streets or in public areas, then you can be flogged, for example, whipped. And then in some countries, if you commit certain acts, you can be punished by a very severe term. Sometimes you read about it, 120 years in prison, with no chance of coming out beforehand. And then in some other countries, you have capital punishment, and it's quite prevalent in quite a few countries. In the United States, for example, of course, not all states of the United States allow it, but quite a few do. Then in Asian countries, Middle East countries, in Japan, quite a few countries, India, Saudi Arabia, all these places, you can of course even be executed. But the number of punishments in this regard, even in China, are coming down slowly. Again, the method of execution can vary. In the United States, for example, it's an electric chair, or then they had this cocktail of drugs that they would inject into the prisoner, the one who has been condemned to death. Or there's a shooting squad possibility, or you could be hanged. So there are different ways to go about doing these things. In the European Union, well, this has more or less been outlawed now everywhere. So I think the last executions were in the 1950s or something, and not anymore after that. Some of the newer member states who joined in 2007, I think, or 2005, and then later on. So maybe they have had some later dates. In France, you could be punished with a guillotine, it cuts your head. And the last of these public beheadings were in the 1950s, if I'm not mistaken. So, okay, again, you have all these sort of things. So there are a lot of debates about these. But the theory basically states here that this is not about social welfare per se, but rather you have to punish guilty people. I mean, if you don't punish it, then it's a farce, and justice should not only be served, but should also be seen to be served. So what are the important characteristics of criminal law? As I said, well, criminal intent, it's also known as mens rea, and you have to draw the boundary between accidental and intentional harm. So there are some examples of this given here, just like a driving example. If you drive at the speed of 250, then there's something seriously wrong with you. And in Estonia and Tallinn, this was the case a couple of months ago, or last year. There was this guy driving on that Lagnate, I think, or the one towards Lasnamäe, and at a super high speed, and then he went and banged into somebody, and of course, other cars got damaged and some people died. And then sometimes you have people who take alcohol or drugs and then are driving fast, and then they bang into another person or a car, and then of course that's a big issue here. So what are the various aspects that need to be looked at? Number one, of course, is if you are carefully driving, the speed limit is 50, you're driving at 45, you have not consumed alcohol, you're driving as carefully as possible, slowly. And then it's an unfortunate accident. Somebody is cycling and loses a balance and falls in front of your car, and you can't control the car at the wrong time. So again, well, of course, as a car driver, the blame is always on you, but in this case, it's clearly visible that you were careful. Then there are those who are negligent or reckless, and they are over speeding or driving under influence, and of course that's a second category. And then the third is intentional. Intentional is, I take this bus or a truck and I go to this crowded place, and then I put my truck into the gear and then just drive over people. Doof, 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 doof. That's intentional. So in all these three circumstances, as you can imagine, there are different punishments, because in the first case, nothing to be punished about, right? In the second case, maybe a fine, maybe you lose your right to drive for a few weeks or months, maybe it gets cancelled in that sense, or maybe even a slight imprisonment because you are driving under influence, Christmas night, and you're drunk and you shouldn't be driving, and you go and kill somebody. So of course, different areas over here, but this is criminal intent, and so again, in this there are different categories as well with regard to intentional or cruelty. It depends on your level of cruelty and how perverted the crime is, and of course based on that the punishments can even go higher. Then there is the aspect of public harm and public prosecution. So this is basically about the fact that the society has been harmed. It's not so much about the victims, but more about the fact that society has been harmed. So for example, if you look at the terror attacks in Vienna, yes, of course some people died, but the bigger impact here is on society as a whole, and the news spreads and it causes fear and causes reprisals, and so all of those aspects are of relevance. So the old school way, traditional view is that crime harms the public, and so in that case, then the public has a right to defend itself and through the state to take action against the criminal. But sometimes you could have victimless crimes. There's no victim in the sense like gambling or prostitution or selling illegal drugs. Now, of course, they may not be entirely victimless. Yeah, money is still spent, and sometimes there is trafficking of people, and sometimes, even though the victims themselves may be okay with it, society's peace and security is threatened. So again, you have this aspect which needs to be looked into. Then the third category would be an attempted crime, right? So let's say I decide to hijack a plane, and I go on the plane, and then I say hijack, and then because of my Indian accent, everybody starts laughing and nobody takes me seriously, and then the pilot just laughs and takes my weapon away, and the police come and they laugh and they take me to prison or something. Now in this situation here, well, was it a joke? No, of course not, right? I tried to hijack a plane, but I failed in the attempt, but it's still an attempted hijack. So of course there's a criminal offense over here, and the law will then take its course. So again, you have failed attempts at crime, and these can cause fear and other harm to the public. So as a result of that, these sort of offenses are also punishable. Then another important characteristic would be the fact that sometimes you have multiple people involved in a criminal offense. So let's say I'm the driver, I drive 3 people to the bank. And so I wait outside the bank with the car, and the car is running, engine is running, and then these 3 friends of mine, they go into the bank, and one of them stands at the door with a gun, and then the second one just goes and tells everybody to lay down on the floor and to give the money, and then the last guy, this crazy guy, goes and shoots the manager. Now what happens in this case? Well, of course, all 4 of us would now be in trouble. Although even I may say, hey, I was not even holding a gun, I was just sitting in the car outside and I had no idea there's a shooting going on. But no, you went with the group, so you're in the gang, and now everybody gets punished equally because, how did the shooter get there? I took him there. So well, of course, I am a part of this criminal conspiracy, and so, everybody gets punished equally. Otherwise, it's impossible to figure out who gets punished more or who gets punished less. Of course, in this situation, I could become a government witness, in which case maybe I may get a lesser sentencing or freedom or whatever. So you have these issues. Then there is the standard of proof criteria. You have to be innocent unless proven guilty. And so this is a very high standard to be fulfilled, which is why a lot of criminal trials can collapse, because if you have a situation where the public prosecutor or the government lawyer is not able to prove their case entirely, then it's always a problem. Yeah. So as I gave the example in the past, let's say, again, just to reaffirm this, here is somebody, and in front of 8 people, I take a knife and I stab this person. Yeah. And this person is not very happy about that. So well, I'm sure I could have done better than this, but yeah. So here we are, and I go and stab this person, and now this person bleeds to death. And of course, everybody has seen this, and it's a big issue. And the cops come and they find the blood-stained knife and my fingerprints, and so of course, there's a investigation, the trial happens, and now at the trial stage, if the post-mortem report suggests that the wound that caused the death is not from a sharp instrument, but rather from a broken glass bottle type of device or instrument, so then now here's a confusion here. What is the murder weapon? Because the police are saying the murder weapon that they found was the knife, but the autopsy report on the victim's body shows the death was caused by, I don't know, poisoning or something else. Then in that case, well, we have a serious problem here. Unless the police can prove through their government lawyer that Pawan had used a knife with poison on it and stabbed the victim, like in a semicircle or circle or something. This is important here now, because if you're not able to prove that somebody is guilty beyond reasonable doubt, then in that case, then you have a serious problem here. The trial will collapse. And I remember a few years ago in Estonia, there was this issue that, criminal convictions were almost 95% or 99%. And that's not a good sign either. It means that every time the criminal lawyer comes to court, the government lawyer, the public prosecutor, whatever you call this person, then the judge agrees with whatever this government lawyer is saying. Then again, that's not a good sign. It doesn't mean that everything is successful and wow. It just means that there's a breakage in the system here, because obviously there's something wrong if the judge is not able to treat everybody without a bias. You see this in many places. Like, for example, if I give all of you 5 in the course, then the dean's office asks me, what the hell, what's going on? Why am I giving everybody a 5? If I fail all of you, then again the dean's office will tell me, what the hell, why is everybody failing? So of course there's always somebody above somebody to supervise. And then so if you have a situation where 99% of criminals are charged and are pronounced guilty as charged, then in that case, again, there's an issue here. Maybe the criminal justice system is not working, or the police is super efficient, which is not usually the case. All right. So why do you have punishments? Well, of course, because punishment is an important factor. You have to show that somebody is being punished, and so the guilty are suffering, and so there are different reasons for this. Of course, if it's self-defense, for example, then that can have an impact. So let's say certain questions arise regarding punishment. So punishment could comprise of either a jail term or fines or probation or things like that. and sometimes, of course, you can also be punished by being beaten up or executed. So the four main aims would be retribution. Number one, that is, it's a very basic instinct that people have. It's about revenge. So somebody did something bad, and now, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Yeah, well, not always a good idea, but yeah, sometimes you need to have strict laws in some situations. Then there is deterrence. Deterrence is you try to prevent the commission of future crimes. So you show, look, if you do something like this is what will happen. You'll get 25 years in prison, or you'll get hanged, or whatever. Yeah, and so hopefully that will be deterrence. It will deter future criminals, but that doesn't really help much, because very often crimes are committed on an impulse. And in that situation, well, it's like hot-blooded thing. I'm in a bar, I'm drinking, and somebody comes and tells me, don't drink in a bar. Don't you know there's a coronavirus everywhere? And I get angry and I say, what the hell, why can't I drink? And they take my beer away from me, and then I try to take it back, and they punch me, and then I go all crazy and throw something on that person, and then that person dies or something. So again, you see what happened here is this was not the plan, right? I went to the bar to have a nice time, to get drunk, and then some crazy guy came and spoiled my mood, and one thing led to another, and now so in this situation, the theory of deterrence may not really work. Another aspect also is, the first time you do something wrong, of course, it's bad. Second time, third time, fourth time, by then you are an expert, and you don't really feel bad about it anymore. You go to prison, you make new friends, you come out. In fact, you miss prison. You want to go back to prison, to your old friends again, and so this cycle continues. So this deterrence effect gets weaker and weaker every time. And of course, then there are exemplary sentences, and this is all about publicity and trying to show that this is not acceptable behavior, and so you try to give the maximum possible punishment. Then there is rehabilitation. It could be, well, maybe we try to make you a better person. And I've heard about this, read about this in the United States, for example. Many people have criminal records. So like Mike Tyson in the UK, US, had a criminal record, and then he liked to punch people. Yeah, and so the judge said, hey, you like to punch people, become a boxer, right? You have anger issues and all this inside you, and we can't have you going around punching people on the streets or something and getting into fights. But if you want to have a fight, become a boxer. Go take out your anger on your opponent and break that person's jaw. Do it legally, and then get even money for that, get paid for that. And so that very often happens. People are told that as rehabilitation, they have to work for a charity, or they have to join the army or something like that. In other countries, maybe not so much in the European Union. Then there is public protection, wherein you are put in prison, so that then you can't come out and do anything bad while you are in prison. Public is safe. You come out of prison, then you have a problem. Of course, in all of this, there can be some controversial questions. So for example, let's say a man rapes a woman, and now she gets pregnant, and for some reason, religious or whatever, she does not wish to undergo an abortion. So now she has the baby. So question that would arise in this case is, now of course this man, the rapist, is being punished and has been sent to prison. Now he's out of prison. Does he need to pay child support for the child? That can be controversial. If he wins a lottery while he's in prison, can his victim claim that now he should pay her because she has suffered because of his acts, but he's already in prison? This is a double punishment. Conversely, could it be that this man now says, well, it's my child, so I want visitation rights. I want to meet this child every week, and every alternate weekend I want to keep the child at my home. You see, there are a lot of issues that come up over here. And again, of course, sometimes punishments can carry on, in the sense that You often come across these situations, somebody commits a crime, footballer, and so he was punished for the sexual assault, and now 6 years later he comes out of prison. So he was 19 when he did this. Now he is, well, so he's 25, can still play football, but now the football club will not hire him because they say it's bad for their reputation. So what you're having here is a person is being punished twice, thrice, multiple times for the same offense. So again, you see there are a lot of these controversies that can arise over here. So when you look at sentencing, it could be a mandatory sentence, it could be a minimum sentence, it could be, it could be a custodial sentence. So you have a lot of different aspects here. Basically, it starts with a warning, fine, probation, and then it goes higher up. And then, of course, if it's a mental disorder situation, then this person will be sent to a hospital or a mental asylum. Or if it's a motoring offense, then you could lose your driving license for 2 years. So there are a lot of these aspects. And then, of course, if you have young offenders, then there's special treatment for them. There are some who are below a certain age, you cannot be charged. So let's say you are 10 years old and you commit a crime. Very often, you can't be charged as an adult. Even if you're 18, if the law says that you have to be a certain age, then if you're a minor, you cannot be charged as an adult. And this can cause a lot of problems sometimes because, somebody, let's say the age is 18 and somebody commits this horrible terrorist murder act at the age of 17 years and 11 months. So you see over here, just because of that 1 month, this person cannot be treated like an adult. And so, of course, there are a lot of controversies. But for all these investigations, the police have a lot of powers. So there are a lot of aspects about them which you can read about over here. And they have to carry out investigations. They have to keep society safe. So they have pre-arrest powers. They have powers of arrest with a warrant, without a warrant. And so there are certain situations which require a warrant. But if it's a public safety issue, the police don't need a warrant, right? The terrorist shooting somebody in Vienna, police don't have to go and get a warrant to arrest this person. They can go straight away, catch this person, shoot this person. So again, different aspects over here. And then the police can also detain you limited amount of time, 24 hours, 48 hours. And then they have to present you before a magistrate. So during the course of this detention and after, the magistrate gives the police detention powers, then there can be interrogation. So there are some videos about that as well. And of course, in this you have the Miranda rights, like in the US, a bit disputed now. So, sir, you have the right to remain silent. Everything that you say can be held against you in a court of law. If you do not have an attorney, you will be provided with one. You do not have to, confess to anything. So, there are all these issues that come up here. And as a result of this, it can also be intimate searches and fingerprinting. So how much is acceptable is a gray zone sometimes, and your lie detector test and things like that. So this is more or less the whole chapter. Of course, just the highlights of it. So this should cover this aspect of foundations of law for today, and no more lectures from me. So now we meet for the exams that are going to be online. All right. So thank you for your time and have a nice week and the rest of the year. Goodbye.